Dzień za dniem, noc za nocą. Nasze życie upływa pod bezkresnym niebem. Marzymy o rzeczach wielkich, ale życzymy sobie rzeczy prostych. Myślami wybiegamy do przodu, ale jesteśmy świadomi, że życie toczy się tu i teraz. Spoglądamy w niebo z dobrego miejsca na ziemi.
For Britain because she was one of the few female leaders who fought against the Roman Empire. Her name is Boudica or Boudicca because there are two pronunciations possible, and she was from the tribe of Iceni that originally lived on the island of Great Britain, and when Romans came, she started a revolt against the Roman Empire, and she even burned the settlement that the Romans built, namely Londinium, which is known as London today. So she is very important because she was a hero. She's a national hero, typically British woman. I think first woman mentioned that fought against the Roman Empire. When I think about British history, I think about women a lot because there were many queens, and another important woman in British history that I'm going to tell you of. So let's move on to the next person. Next person is Alfred the Great, and Alfred the Great was the first king of, let's say, England, but it wasn't England then. It was a few kingdoms of Anglo-Saxons, and he kind of started to put them together and to create the system. But unfortunately, we can't see Alfred the Great on the screen, and we still have Boudicca. I don't know why. Panowie, mamy tam wciąż Boudickę na ekranie. Okay, so Alfred the Great is known as the father of England because, as I mentioned before, he tried to put all the kingdoms of England together. And he was a bit successful. He crowned himself as a king of Anglo-Saxons. He was the king of Wessex, and Wessex was one of those little kingdoms. And he also started a codification of the English legal system. So, you know, it is very early, look at it's 9th century, to start codification of a legal system so that all the member kind of countries of Anglo-Saxons have the same laws. So he started this, and you can see his picture. He's called the Great because of his great achievements for the United Kingdom. Next person is another Briton who was also a leader. He lived between 1274 and 1329. His name is Robert the Bruce, and he was a Scotsman. And why is he important for the Scottish people and for the whole history of the United Kingdom? Because he kept Scotland independent from England. He didn't let Scotland become dependent on England and kind of be swallowed by England. He managed to keep Scotland separate. He's a Scottish national hero, and I'm sure you've heard about another hero, William Wallace, They lived more or less in the same time. William Wallace was called Braveheart, but he wasn't a king. He was just a revolutionist, let's call him, a revolt leader. And Robert the Bruce was the person who kind of did similar things, but was successful. Because as we know, William Wallace wasn't very successful. He died. He was killed by English. And thanks to the work of Robert the Bruce, who is very important for the Scottish people, later when Scotland and England joined together to be one country, Scotland was treated as an equal partner, not as a subordinate. Subordinate is somebody or something or a country that is dependent on another country. So in this case, Scotland was an equal partner. It means it had the same laws that England. So he was very important. So remember, when you are asked about Scottish national heroes, you should remember about Robert the Bruce and William Wallace, known as Braveheart. But I'm sure you've seen a film about him. Next person is another politician. As you can see, he lived a little bit later, in the times of Henry VIII, a very, very, very famous king and important for the British Empire too. He was a minister to the king. It means he advised him on many, many, many things. Maybe you have heard that Henry VIII started Reformation in the Anglican of the Church. He started the Reformation in his country, and he broke with Rome. It means he became independent of Rome, and that was partly with the help of Thomas Cromwell. Thomas Cromwell wanted king to become independent of Rome, but to cut a long story short, King Henry VIII was a man with great temper, and he at one minute he loved somebody, at another minute he hated somebody. We know that he had 6 wives, some of them were beheaded, and unfortunately, also, Thomas Cromwell was beheaded by Henry VIII as a traitor, which means zdrajca, but that was kind of a common reason to kill somebody, call somebody in these times, call somebody a traitor, and then you can safely behead him, and nobody is really kind of curious about it. He was a traitor, so he was beheaded, but he's responsible also for defining the relationship between Parliament and the king, and that sometimes king had to listen to Parliament. That was Thomas Cromwell's doing. Okay, when we are on the topic of Henry VIII, I just remind you that he had 6 wives, and there is a poem that may help you to remember how many of them died. It goes like that. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. So we know whom of them were killed, whom of them survived, and whom of them were divorced, luckily. Okay, so if you want to read about it, go on and Google Henry VIII, a very, very interesting person. And Thomas Cromwell was advised to him. Okay, next person is a woman which is very important to me because I'm absolutely crazy about her. It's Queen Elizabeth I. I think she's my role model. Yeah, I can say so. She was a daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, so she was a daughter of his 2nd wife, and whom he beheaded. And she took the throne after her sister Mary, and Mary took the throne after their cousin Lady Jane Grey, and Lady Jane Grey took the throne after the son of Henry VIII, Edward. So it was a complicated matter, but Elizabeth kind of brought a fresh breath to the throne. She was very well educated. She was very interested in literature, in theater, in music, and she had all those Renaissance ideas in her head. She also was a great politician. Thanks to her, England became a wealthy country, and she's also well known for defeating the Spanish Armada, which was the biggest and the most famous fleet in the world. So she defeated the Spanish Armada, and she also started under her rule, actually, the exploration of the world started. She gave money, she founded those explorations, she helped literary men, like she knew Shakespeare, and she even had him at her court in her theater, but because she also had a theater at court. She is also responsible for the name of one of the colonies in the USA, Virginia, because one of her pirates, one of her men of the sea, let's call him, he claimed Virginia for her. His name was Walter Raleigh, and to honor her, he named this land Virginia because she was a virgin queen, because she never had a husband. And one more interesting thing about Elizabeth I, she was a bit crazy because she was really obsessed with her looks. So there were only 9 portraits of her, official portraits, that could be shown to the people. So there was really no chance to see the real self of Elizabeth. Apparently, she wasn't very ugly, as they say, but she was a redhead. So, she wanted to have control over what she looks like to her people. Okay, another person is Sir Francis Drake. He was also a queen pirate, one of the queen pirates. He was an English sea explorer. And apart from exploring the lands around the world, he circumnavigated the world. He also, robbed many Spanish ships and brought a lot of money to the crown. So as I mentioned, he circumnavigated the world, so he sailed around the world in one go, and this is actually very important. And he fired the imagination of a nation. It means that after him there were more explorers and people who wanted to explore the world and to get some lands for England and to make England a huge country. Okay, another guy, I'm sure you know him, it's William Shakespeare. To be or not to be, that's the most famous quote. But William Shakespeare altogether is known as the greatest writer in English history. He created many words, he created jokes, he created a lot of stereotypes. And he was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, and his nickname is the Swan of Avon, and I think you should remember it. He wrote altogether 36 plays. There were tragedies, comedies, romance plays, and also historical plays. And he wrote also 155 sonnets. We don't really know much about him. He spelled his names in a number of ways. He had a wife at the beginning of his life and 3 children. He was a son of a glove maker, but he decided to leave Stratford-upon-Avon and go to London to become an actor. And eventually he became also a writer, a very successful writer, and I would say also an entrepreneur, because he was an owner of the theatre. His theatre was the Globe, and you can see the replica of his theatre in London today. It was built in the 90s by Sam Wanamaker. So if you want to see how the Elizabethan theatre looked, you can go online and check out the Globe, the present-day Globe. Okay, let's move on to some less distant time. Let's move on to Sir Isaac Newton. I'm sure you've heard about him. He was a mathematician, a genius mathematician, a physicist, an astronomer, and also, surprise, surprise, a theologian. So it means he learned about religion. It sounds strange that a religious man made such discoveries. He formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation. You know this famous story that an apple fell on his head and he realized that there is a force pulling this apple towards the earth. That's how he discovered the universal gravitation, but he also created and formulated many other laws connected with physics and astronomy. He built the foundations of modern science. I think you can safely say that he is kind of one of the fathers of astronomy. Okay, next guy is Adam Smith, also very important for science, but for different branch of science. Adam Smith lived in the 18th century, and he is known as the father of economy. He was a great thinker, he was an academic, so he worked at the university, and he wrote a very famous book, The Wealth of Nations. Wealth means the richness of nations, and this was the book that created the foundation, the basis of the modern day economy. And I think he is the father of economy and the most important person for the economists today. Another guy is William Wilberforce. You might have heard about him recently because he's important for the Black Lives Matter movement, as he was one of the first advocates of abolishing slave trade. Abolishing means ending. He was British, and he wanted British Empire to stop selling people for money. He thought it was unethical, and he campaigned for it for years, and actually his campaign helped to abolish slave trade in the British Empire. They passed an act that stopped this horrible procedure, and that's why he's very important politician, and we should remember about him, William Wilberforce, the first advocate of abolishing slave trade. And now we move on to a woman. This woman was a writer, my favorite writer from the British classics. Her name is Jane Austen. She wrote about the women and about the role of wealthy women in society, and maybe, okay, let's look at her books. She wrote quite a few books, but those are the most important ones: Sense and Sensibility, Persuasion, Emma and Pride and Prejudice. All of these books are basically about the same. They are about wealthy women looking for husbands, and they have some problems with money, then can't find a husband, then they find this husband in the end, and that's how the story goes in almost every of these books. But these books are funny, and there is a lot of proverbs coming from these books and sayings, and I think they are worth reading, and you should remember her because she was the first successful female writer of England. She never married herself. She was single, and she actually earned some money on her writing, which wasn't very popular. She wrote as herself, she wrote as a woman, and she managed to earn some money. So this was different to the normal situation of a wealthy woman in the 19th and 18th century. Okay, and then we come to some more women in British literature, the Bronte sisters. The Bronte sisters are famous for their books, but I told you before about Jane Austen that she wrote about wealthy women and in their want of finding a perfect husband. And Bronte sisters, there were three of them. There was Charlotte, Anne, and Emily. They wrote about women who had less money than Jane Austen's heroines, and they had to make money on their own. So basically, if you look at the first book that I put on the screen, Charlotte Bronte is Jane Eyre. It's a book about a governess who falls in love with the man who she works for, and after some time they become happily married. Villette is about Brussels in the 19th century, and it's also about a governess who finds a husband. Then we've got Anne Bronte, her book, The Tenant of Wiltful Hall, was about divorce, and it was very unpopular. Divorce in the 19th century was not a normal thing, and she wrote about a divorced woman, and that's what the book is about. And the last one, Emily Bronte, she wrote Wuthering Heights. It's a romance, but also a ghost story, and I recommend that you read it because it's quite different to the previous books. Okay, then we come to another man connected with science, George Stephenson. George Stephenson was a Scottish person. He was a great engineer. He didn't invent the steam engine, but he developed developed, kind of made it better. He developed the steam locomotive engine, but it's not also only this. He also established passenger train service and built railways, and that's what he's famous for building railways. So remember about him, not only steam engine, but also building railways and starting passenger train service. Charles Darwin, we've heard about him. I've learned actually not a long time ago that he became interested in theory of evolution when he was 23, so quite young, but he was a famous biologist, naturalist and geologist, and he created the theory of evolution, and it was quite a challenge. His ideas weren't popular when he started, but he was a pioneer in this field, and now we know that he was right. And he wrote a book about evolution called On the Origin of Species, and I think you should remember this title as well. Okay, then we've got another woman, Florence Nightingale. You can see it's actually a photo. She lived in the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, and she's very important for the whole world because she was a pioneer in modern nursing and in statistical graphics. So she was a nurse, and she opened a school for nurses. She worked in the Crimean War, and she helped soldiers to survive this war, wounded soldiers to survive, to live. She also is known as the lady with the lamp because she also always checked at night if her patients were doing well. So if you think about Florence Nightingale, remember her nickname, the lady with the lamp. Okay, then we come to politics again, and the next key hero is Winston Churchill, Sir Winston Churchill, who was a very famous politician. He was a prime minister in the times of Second World War and also after it. He led the country to victory in World War II, and he helped to rebuild British economy after the war. And he is very significant. I'm sure you know his pictures in a hat and with a walking stick, and probably you have heard about Churchill dog. So if you haven't, Google it. Okay? He is also a Nobel Prize winner for literature because he is also a writer. So it's worth to know that apart from being a politician, he was also a writer, and he even won a literary Nobel Prize. Modern day, almost, because we have Stephen Hawking as the next person, another scientist, cosmologist. He was disabled, he was diagnosed with ALS, and that's why his movement with time became kind of worsened, and he couldn't communicate normally with the world. He was kind of using some machines that helped him communicate. He was a specialist on black holes and quantum gravity, and he wrote a very famous book, A Brief History of Time, and I think every person should read it in Polish or in English, whichever you prefer. It's a scientific book, but it's not that scientific that you cannot understand, so I recommend you read this book. Okay, and we come to the last person in my list. This is Margaret Thatcher. That's another role model for me. She was a politician, and she was the longest serving British Prime Minister. She was very decisive and very hard with her politics. That's why she became a first woman Prime Minister of Great Britain. She is known for her hairdo, but also for her nickname, the Iron Lady, because she never bent towards others. She had always her last word, and her famous saying is that when the government says they will give you something, don't think they will give you something which they own. They give you something that you paid for. So I think we should remember this, and this is a very famous quote of her. Remember Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, and her service to the Great Britain. Okay? So if you want to check out my sources are here. They are mostly Wikipedia, and some pictures were taken from other websites, and I recommend you watch this presentation one more time, dig in, and also go back to previous presentation to see take a look, to think about some other famous Britons. Thank you. Dzięki.